friends, this is Peter Herbeck. I hope this video finds you at peace in Christ in these challenging times that we're living through. First, I want to thank all those who have responded to the recent videos that Ralph Martin and I and some of our team members have been doing over the past few months, mainly during this COVID period. We do feel, thank you for the encouragement, but we also feel very strongly like the Lord is helping us, that there's great grace for whatever challenge we face. Remember, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. As the world gets darker, guess what? The light of Christ is going to shine more and more. As the enemy ratchets up his aggressive push against the church, the Lord's going to give us all the strength that we need. The key is that in our minds and in our hearts, we're focused on the right things, that we're living in, through, and from Jesus, and we're not getting caught up, as I said last week, in all the storms that are whipping around us. We can spend an inordinate amount of time and energy focused on what's out there, and it draws us away. It can draw us away from living in and from the Lord. The key is to trust in his strength in you. He wants to give you what you need to walk through and to bear fruit in any and all circumstances. So one of the subtle strategies of the enemy is to get us so preoccupied with other things, caught up in so many conversations and so much trouble and so much watching and things of TV and social media and getting in arguments and the rest of it, that it disrupts us internally. We lose our peace and we don't have time to spend with him, which is the key. If the enemy can get us to cut ourselves off from, or just drift a bit from our daily living with the Lord and abiding in him, he wins a big victory, because the strength we have is from the Lord, friends. And the Lord said, if you abide in me, you'll bear much fruit. And so even in these difficult times, he wants us to be bearing fruit in and for the kingdom that he has set for you. You know, the works, like it says, Paul says, that God has ordained for you and for your life, the unique life he's given to you. He wants to bear fruit for you through good works that he has planned. But you're not going to know what those are. You're not going to be able to operate in those. You're not going to be fruitful in them if you're not primarily rooted in him, being still, knowing that he's God, giving him really your best time each day, talking with him and walking with him, yielding to the direction and hope of the work of the Holy Spirit in you. So let me encourage you to do that. We don't have to be afraid of anything. I mean, the phrase "be not afraid" that is, given 365 times in the Bible isn't just for those times when we're not afraid. It's for times when we get concerned and anxious and we're tempted to be fearful. So Jesus wants to show us that there's nothing that we have to be afraid of. So that's point one today. Point two, I want to tell you that I'm excited about something. I'm excited, I'm grateful, very thankful for a recent document, really two recent documents put out by two different dioceses that speaks right into the spiritual battle that we're facing. Remember, maybe last week or 2 weeks ago, I read something from Pope Benedict XVI in the new biography on his life, and he's being interviewed by Peter Seewald, and he's discerning what we're facing. And he said this, I'll just remind you, he said, today the church is facing, and the Pope and the bishops and all of us, we're facing a worldwide dictatorship of seemingly humanistic ideologies, and to contradict them constitutes exclusion from the basic social consensus. This is part of the fear that is emerging in parts of the church, and confusion and destabilizing, that these humanistic ideologies are now being aggressively pushed on the church and on people throughout society. This is happening globally. He said that today, hundreds of years ago, we never would have thought things that have now become normal, the redefinition of marriage, a total acceptance of homosexual behavior, all kinds of things, and now the pushing of transgenderism and multi-genders and all that, the aggressive push for it. He said, we never would have thought that it was even ever going to be an issue, but here it is. And he describes it this way. He said, modern society is in the process of formulating an anti-Christian creed, and resisting it is punishable by social excommunication. What is he? He's discerning. He's seeing the trouble. He's discerning what it is. It's an anti-Christian creed. It's People emerging under spiritual influence that they may not even recognize. They might think they're on the side of the angels and they're doing the right thing, but they're saying, this is what we believe, and this is what we think everybody should believe. And we're going to use the force of law and whatever we can, Hollywood's help, Wall Street's help, you name it, we're going to push it because we're on the right side. And he described it. He said, the fear of this spiritual power of the Antichrist is therefore only too natural. And it requires discernment in the church. It requires prayer. And it requires courage to be able to respond to it. And I just want to say, I want to give a shout out to the Archdiocese of St. Louis and Archbishop Carlson, who put a document together to put out their church's statement, that diocese statement on answering the issues of transgenderism and things that are now so present in the culture. Gender dysphoria in particular is what they're addressing. And I want to recommend that you read this. This is beautifully put, very compassionate, very wise. And what it is simply doing is presenting what the church thinks about these things. And the letter is primarily to the faithful, right? To those who call themselves disciples, to those who are baptized. And the Archbishop is fulfilling his responsibility to speak to Jesus's disciples. He has apostolic authority in his diocese to lead those disciples to imitate Jesus, to walk in his footsteps, to be faithful to him, to live with an eternal perspective. And so he's addressing a problem that really is, its root is really from the kingdom of darkness, and it's making its way through the world, and disciples should not be surprised when the world acts worldly. We're living in a battle between two kingdoms. Not a surprise to us at all. But what we can't get confused about is how we're supposed to respond to it. And he, as a good shepherd, is seeing that the pressure from the world is leading many baptized people to accept things that are profoundly offensive to the Lord. They stand against truth and goodness and beauty, and they literally lead to great harm and the continued deconstruction of human identity, marriage, family, redefining human sexuality. All those things are on the table. And friends, that's the battlefield right there. That's the big battlefield, because it's deconstructing the icon of God, the family. So that's the devil's strategy. Whether or not it's these people's strategy or that politician's strategy is in a certain way irrelevant from a Christian point of view. So he's speaking to disciples and also the Diocese of Lansing, my diocese, just last Friday came out with their statement. And it's compassionate, it bears witness to the truth, and it calls us to stand. What we're called to do, friends, in spiritual battles simply is to stand, to bear witness, and live the faith. Just live it and not compromise. So a couple of things from these documents, just to give you a sense of why I think they're so important. There's different elements and pages to it, dimensions to it. So he's building on an exhortation from Pope Francis when Archbishop and other bishops in the region, in the central region, I think, of the United States, went to visit their annual ad limina visit, it's called, with the Pope. The Pope underlined his great concern for all the gender ideology that's unfolding. And he reminded them of the document Amoris Laetitia, where he spoke specifically about this. And so it's included in the document. I just want to read what Pope Francis said. He said, yet another challenge is posed by the various forms of an ideology of gender that denies the difference and reciprocity in nature of man and woman and envisages a society without sexual differences, thereby eliminating the anthropological basis of the family. This ideology leads to educational programs and legislative enactments that promote a personal identity and emotional intimacy radically separated from the biological difference between male and female. Consequently, human identity becomes the choice of the individual, one which can also change over time. It needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the socio-cultural role of sex, that is gender, can be distinguished but not separated. These things cannot be separated. So the Pope is very clear about it. At one point he called the gender ideology demonic. It's consistent with what Pope Benedict was saying. It's an anti-Christian worldview. It's against Christ. And so what the document does is it begins with compassion, understanding the genuine battle that human beings find with understanding their sexual identity. It's not just people who are battling with trans issues or homosexual issues. It's everybody at one point in their many people, let me put it that way, at different times in their life. To be integrated as human beings is a challenge. That's why the church is always there to help. That's why generations before us help us see what pathways we should walk. And so one of the things that the document takes up are the challenges that the culture is using to push back. For example, the philosophy that underlies the energy that's moving forward many of these decisions. For number one, they identify that feelings define our identity. How you feel is who you are. That jumped right out at me because I have a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who was battling with these things and made decisions in the wrong direction on some of this, said the very thing to me. I am my feelings. My feelings are my reality. My feelings are decisive. And that leads to the second point. Human integrity means acting on our persistent desires. I have to be true to myself. Exactly what the person told me. This was years ago. Said, my feelings tell me who I am. They articulate my experience, and this is what defines me. And so in order for me to be true to myself, I have to follow the direction of these persistent feelings that I have inside me. And anyone who doesn't affirm, this is 3, anyone who doesn't affirm our feelings and our actions hates us. So this document takes up these very issues in just short paragraphs. I'll give you an example. This second one. Second, human integrity requires that this is the bishop's response. Human integrity requires us to sift our desires, not just simply to follow them. Why? The reason is simple. Our desires have many sources. Some of them are rooted in our identity as God's sons and daughters. Some are the result of original sin. It's an interesting point I want to make on another video sometime, that today the new Gnostic worldview of the progressives, they don't believe in original sin. The problem's out there. It's not in here. So everything that's in here doesn't need to be questioned because it's natural. I made that way, or it's perfect, or whatever. It's what's outside of me that confuses what's in me, and what's in me is all that matters. So there's denial of original sin that's very present. Some come from our personal history of sin. Human experience tell us that following our desires sometimes helps us live well, and sometimes leads us to trouble. Catholic theology simply places that experience against an eternal horizon. Acting on our desires sometimes keeps us moving toward heaven, and sometimes it does not. Desires are not self-authenticating. That is, just because I have a desire doesn't authenticate the validity of that desire. And then he goes on to say, whether or not they move us toward heaven is the criteria for making this decision. So there's a lot of gold like that in this document, as well as the one from the Diocese of Lansing. The Diocese of Lansing gets so practical here, and so does this one. It says, speaking on behalf of the diocese, after it lays out the same kind of theological principles, then brings it down to day-to-day decisions. Here's one example. The diocesan policy means that students and parents will be addressed with pronouns in accordance with their biological sex. Students will participate in sports and use bathrooms and locker rooms in accord with their biological sex. And Catholic schools will not cooperate in the administration of puberty blocking or cross-sex hormones. So again, there's more to it in these documents, but I want to give you the flavor, and I want to give a shout out for the bishops who are standing up. This is really important, and they're simply teaching the faith and reminding the faithful what Jesus expects of us. And Jesus, and living with Jesus in heaven forever, is the standard. He is the measure. He's the standard. And they do a good job of expressing that in these documents. And I want to just take a minute to read a couple things to remind us of our basic call to discipleship. Here's a paragraph. It says, Jesus of Nazareth, the gospel accounts relate, always comes asking disciples to follow him, not merely to accept him or to believe in him or to worship him, which he certainly does, but to follow him. One either follows Christ or one does not. It's all or nothing. There's no compartmentalization of the faith, no realm, no sphere, no business, no politic in which the lordship of Christ will be excluded. We either make him Lord of all lords, or we deny him as Lord of any. And of course, the words of Jesus himself saying, if you want to become my follower, anyone who wants to become my follower, let him deny himself. Let her deny herself and take up her cross and follow me. What does deny self mean? Well, right here, right now, the very topic we're talking about is very much alive in our culture, and lots of people are running to get behind it, or to avoid getting canceled, or losing financial status, or being marginalized, getting pushed out of the inner social ring, or whatever it is. What they're doing now is they're just saluting it. They're shifting. Okay, if that's what your truth is, I'm right there with you. It doesn't surprise me when the world does that. Disciples cannot do that ever, because again, there's no love without the truth. There's no truth without love. You cannot express the love that Christ expressed by affirming in people things that offend God. Can't do it. So here's the challenge in the battle that we're in. And thanks be to God for these courageous bishops who are getting the word out there, the popes who are giving us clarity and discernment about what's going on. This is what love looks like. And here's the challenge. I want to conclude with this. Remember, I was reading last week from the book of Revelation when John the Apostle is writing to the 7 churches, and he's identifying what he shares with them. And he says this, I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the tribulation, the kingdom, and the patient endurance. This is what the Christian community always in human history shares together. First of all, we're together because we're in one body, which is Jesus. We're sharing the life of Jesus. And he said, we're sharing the tribulation, the spiritual battles in this world of the enemy that are against Christ. Remember what Jesus said, don't be surprised, the world will hate you. Why? Because it hated me first. Understand that. Satan, the Antichrist, and the Antichrist spirit that's arising in our time is against Christ. And it's against every teaching of Jesus, everything that Jesus wants for his people and for his creation. The enemy's against it. So we can't be surprised when this hate comes against us, right? And so hate gets expressed by forcing us to live differently. We can't do that, right? So he says the tribulation and the kingdom, we're living in the kingdom of Christ together. That is the rule of God, the reign of God, the dominion of God. And Jesus expects us to walk in his commandments no matter what, right? And then finally, the patient endurance. Patient endurance is a disposition that's common to Christians throughout history. We're called to have the right self-possession, under the grace and power of the Holy Spirit. We're not panicked. We're not out of control. We're not filled with rage or confusion, but we're fundamentally at peace, and we are ready to endure whatever comes. We don't have to go looking for it. We shouldn't be surprised by it when it comes, but we need to know this. The spiritual battle that we're living through, we need to keep our eye on the end. What's the end? The end ultimately is Christ's return in glory, when he's going to deal with all his enemies, and he's going to deal with the kingdom of darkness in a final way. But we also know already the final thing, the war itself has been won. Christ reigns at the right hand of the Father. Revelations reminds us, the book of Revelation, he is the faithful witness. He witnessed to the truth about what the kingdom is and how we're called to live in it. He was totally faithful to the end, and he was vindicated when he was raised from the dead. And now he's reigning at the right hand of God the Father in heaven. He's the faithful witness. He's the firstborn of a new creation. God's new thing that's going to last forever, that will never be stopped, has already begun. It's in his church. The new creation, those who are born again in Christ, will share his eternity, his eternal life in the reign of God, in the will of the Father forever. It will never be stopped. There's battles and attacks against it in this world. What are we called to do? Paul says very clearly in Ephesians chapter 6, we're battling against spirits of the kingdom of darkness. In the midst of these battles, remember this, human beings are not my fundamental enemy. Satan and his demons are. What am I supposed to do? He says 3 times, stand, stand, stand. Put on the armor of God. Go to Ephesians 6 and see how he describes it. The key point I want to make is we're called simply to stand. That means don't quit. That means live it. This is the only battle and the only war to ultimately gain its victory personally is all you have to do is stand. Don't quit. Right? Because you know ultimately God's already put in you what will lead to the full and final victory and triumph of your life, sharing in the glory that belongs to Jesus. So don't be distracted and led astray. Finally, you heard today, and in these documents contain the teaching of Jesus, the teaching of the church, wisdom, the wisdom of the ages as well, what almost every society throughout the entire history of humanity would agree with. It's being attacked today. So if you hear a bishop or a priest or a sister or a Catholic professional in a parish teach something other than this, they are false teachers. Don't accept it. Don't be confused by it. You need to talk to them about it. You need to challenge them on it. If you're in a situation where a teacher is teaching something false, you need to stand up with humility and with charity. You need to point it out. And if you know this stuff, you'll be able to point it out. If your children in Catholic schools are being taught some of this, and you hear about it, you need to do something about it. Don't get destabilized like, oh, gee, well, I guess he's a bishop, or I guess he's a priest, and I guess he's a theologian, or I guess she's a school teacher, a Catholic school teacher. I can't do anything about it. I'm just a lowly layperson who never got a degree in theology. Don't go there. This is the teaching of Jesus, and we need to stand on it, and we need to lovingly expose the hypocrisy and the false teaching that's going on. That's a loving thing to do. Don't get into screaming matches and get all out of control. Go to the person who's doing it and challenge them. And if they don't respond, go to the bishop. And if the bishop doesn't respond, then you can talk to other bishops, archbishops, friends of his, whatever. If God leads you to do that, do that. Okay? This is very important. This stuff we need to get clear. It's not that hard to understand. Everybody knew this forever. The country is moving into willfully a collective deceit, a kind of fraudulence. And here's that interesting quote from a guy named Douglas Murray who wrote a book called The Madness of Crowds. He's not even Christian. Here's what he said, though. He said there's a kind of massive fraudulence on a massive scale is happening. And he's expressing it this way. He said, huge portions of society are pretending to know about things that we don't know much about, like that all these trans issues and everything is just self-evident. There's nothing harmful here. Just go, go, go. He's saying it's a lie. It's a great deception. Number 2, he said we're pretending not to know about things we all knew about until yesterday. As a result, our societies are dementing themselves. For example, he said we're exceptionally sure about trans when we know almost nothing about it. Number 2, he said relations between the sexes, which we always knew a great deal about, we now pretend are total mysteries to us. He said chromosomes are of no significance anymore. It all comes down to how we feel. This is everything. Okay, as Christians, we know that's madness. We can agree with this guy on that. It's madness. But thanks be to God, he's revealed the truth to us. Thanks be to God for the courage. Give a shout out to these dioceses. Encourage the bishops to keep standing, and this will rally people. And friends, we need to rally to it. Be thankful for it. Trust the Lord in these difficult times, and make sure you're not skimping on your time with him and his word and the sacraments, and you're growing in your faith so you can be a light and you can bear fruit, because soon you're going to be dead, because life is short. You're going to be before the Lord, and he wants to crown you. He wants to crown you and say, Father, look who's here. Look what she did. She stood up. She bore witness even to the end. He or she bore witness. That's in your future, and it's not far away. So let's keep that in mind, and let's support each other walking in it. God bless you.